Hello there, I'm Pate Fenza from Cuisine 4D, and today we'll be talking about bevels, because in the real world nothing has perfect straight edges, all edges are actually a bit rounded. Take the desk you're sitting behind right now, or put a piece of paper under a microscope. In Cinema 4D we call this effect a bevel, and that's what today's tutorial is all about. I've set up a simple scene for this tutorial. So let's put the spline inside of an extrude. I'm using my Alt key here to make the spline a child of the extrude. Let's give it an offset of 1 centimeter. And let's add a metal material to the extrude. Now let's go to the redshift render view to see what this looks like. I'm docking this to the right of my screen. And even though we put a metal material on this object, it still looks way too flat. And that's because the logo doesn't have any bevels yet. Now Extrude gives you the option to enable and disable caps. But you can also bevel these caps. Let's just give it a small bevel with 3 subdivisions. Now this already looks a lot more like metal. Look at how those bevels are catching the light. But this way of adding a bevel can be glitchy sometimes. For instance, look at the O. That wasn't there before. And it's also showing up in the render. Since new geometry is added by these bevels, some corners appear to be too tight. You can try to work around it by editing some of these points, but there's still another problem. With this technique there are only bevels on the caps of the letters, and not on the y-axis. That's why I actually never use these kind of bevels. So let's hide the bevels for these caps. We can also add the extrude to a null. I'm using my Alt-G key here. And add a bevel deformer. I'm using my Shift key here to make the bevel a child of the null, which will then influence all of its siblings. I'll set the offset to the same value and add a subdivision of 3, just like the other one. Since our bevel added geometry to our model, we need to help Cinema with this shading by setting the font tag to 10. And as you can see, there are now bevels on all axes. But this way of beveling has glitches of its own. Cinema also offers you a fake bevel effect, which is called round corners. So let's delete the bevel deformer. This fake effect is material based, so let's open a metal material. With a double click I can search for round corners and add the round corners node to this material. I'll set the radius to the same low value. This node goes into the bump channel, but this material already uses a bump map of its own. But that's no problem, we can add a bump blender node to mix these two nodes. Double click again. I'll plug the original bump map into base input. And the output goes here. So nothing has changed. Now I'll put the round corners node into the input of layer 0. Over here I can set the weight of layer 0. When I put this weight to 1, this overrides the existing bump map of this material. That's why we need to check additive mode, so both bump maps are stacked on top of each other. This effect won't be visible in the viewport, but when you look in the render you can see that all glitches are gone. And it's working on all axes. As I said before, Cinema is faking this bevel using shading. So when you zoom in too close, you see it loses its effect. But unlike the other techniques, this fake bevel effect doesn't add any geometry to your objects, which will also make it render faster. So to be honest, I prefer the fake bevel because it's so much easier to set up. I even use it here. I actually only use the real bevel deformer when I have to. So that's it for today. I hope you liked this recipe and I'll see you next time.